The order for the Jesuits to leave the country was renewed, and nobody knew if this time it was for real, because this was all happening amidst another political crisis. The aging Hideyoshi was desperately and vainly trying to ensure that when he died, his son would succeed him. A show of anti-Christian strength was at least in part of that power struggle. Matters were still unclear when Hideyoshi died in September 1598, and that kicked off first a struggle for power and then an actual civil war, which ended with a crushing victory, not for Hideyoshi's hapless son, but for Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was de facto ruler of Japan from 1600 and formally became shogun in 1603. He died in 1616, but he created the strongly unified government, the so-called Tokugawa shogunate, that would govern Japan until 1868. The political situation is now the opposite of the one the Jesuits had found when they'd first arrived half a century earlier. There's now only one center of political power in Japan with which to deal. Ieyasu at first permitted the Jesuits to remain, and the period between 1590 and 1614 actually turns out to have been the heyday of Christian growth in Japan, despite the killings in 1597. The numbers of Jesuit missionaries peaked at 140 in 1607, and by 1614 there was something like 300,000 Japanese Christians. No longer, it seems, politically organized mass conversions, but actual grassroots growth drawn from all levels of society. Nagasaki had become, in effect, a Christian city. With relatively few priests still, lay confraternities governed for and by ordinary Japanese believers became central to the community's life, often with charitable works at their heart, which helped to grow the community further. So this substantial minority is now on a collision course with Ieyasu's regime. Some local daimyos engaged in some persecution. In one notorious case in Heisen province on Kyushu in 1613, a daimyo executed 8 families of Christians and was daunted when, as we're told, 20,000 Christians showed up, not to protest, but to silently and peacefully witness the executions assembled in ranks, which may have been more threatening than an actual rebellion would have been. Equally, any Japanese suspicions about the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Jesuits and their intentions were being stoked by 2 groups of newcomers, Dutch and English traders, who were keen to assure their hosts that the Jesuits and Catholics in general were scheming and malicious agents of the devil. But we don't know quite what triggered Ieyasu's edict of 1614, the edict in which he declared that the Christian band have come to Japan, not only sending their merchant vessels to exchange commodities, but also longing to disseminate an evil law, to overthrow right doctrine, so that they may change the government of the country and obtain possession of the land. They must be instantly swept out, so that not an inch of soil remains to them in Japan. Under this edict, all Christian clergy were expelled, and the policing of the whole country's religious orthodoxy was put under the control of, as you've probably already guessed, the Buddhists, whom Ieyasu now turned into part of the state religion. And this time, the decree was in earnest. Churches were destroyed, the power of the last pro-Christian daimyos was broken, clergy were assembled in Nagasaki for deportation, and by the end of 1614, most of them had gone. But at least 33 priests remained in Japan illegally. And for the time being, lay Christians were left largely undisturbed. During this period of sort of phony persecution, Christian growth continued. There's in fact quite rapid spread into northern Honshu. The real shift came when Ieyasu died in 1616 and is succeeded by his son Tokugawa Hidetada, who turned an anti-Christian policy into general opposition to foreign contacts and adventures of any kind. He oversaw a slow increase of persecution. By the time he abdicated in 1623, at least 323 Christians had been executed. That included a particularly severe purge in 1622, provoked by the discovery of 2 European priests whom a Japanese Christian trader had tried to smuggle into the country. 55 Christians were killed in Nagasaki on the 10th of September 1622, 25 by burning, 30 by beheading. The burning was done in part to prevent relics being gathered. Anybody who was seen to be praying at the executions was threatened with the same fate. The next shogun, Tokugawa Iemitsu, redoubled the same policy. He was shocked or maybe emboldened by the discovery of a clandestine Christian community complete with Jesuit priests in the capital city of Edo, and he began his reign with a show of force. 89 people were killed in 2 mass executions in December 1623. And significantly, for the first time, 14 of these weren't actually Christians, but were accused of sheltering or assisting Christians. The movement wasn't yet broken. We still have formal Jesuit records from the years 1624 to 6. They're still winning converts. Only in 1627 did this turn into a full-scale general persecution. The regime now recognized that merely killing Christians could be counterproductive because of the classic logic of martyrdom. And so they set their sights on making Christians publicly renounce their faith by the use of brutal torture where necessary. Scalding was one favored method. Another was being hanged upside down over a festering pit until you either recanted or died. And to the regime's dismay, no priests or lay brothers recanted, or not until 1633, when Cristobal Ferreira, the Portuguese vice principal of the Jesuits in Japan, cracked after 6 hours, hung over the pit. And he not only recanted, but then turned informer. In total, something like 1,200 Christians were killed either by execution or torture between 1627 and 34.